Lane Kiffin, Eli Drinkwitz. Okay, I think most people know what I think about Eli, that he's kind of a goofball and not a good coach. But Caleb, I'm backtracking. I think Eli Drinkwitz is a solid coach. Do I like Missouri in the SEC? No, they don't feel like an SEC team to me, and they never will. No offense, Missouri. I think you're great, but you should be in the All-State Big 12. So, Eli Drinkwitz, how many games did Missouri win last season, Caleb?
How many games did Missouri win last season? They won 11.
Okay, so that's respect, right? You got to give him respect for that.
Right.
And then I'll give him a little bit of respect for how he's handling the media. He said recently that you guys can predict and do all that you want to do, but we're ultimately going to decide who starts in this game. So, standing on business, Josh, is definitely goofy, but he appears to have matured in front of our very eyes. Am I wrong, Caleb?
Well, why don't we just take a look at this video he just did to see how mature he is?
Recently?
Last week.
Stands on business,
Ready?
Travis. All
right here. Let's just watch this. It was just a 3-second video, but Eli Drinkwitz right here. Here we go. Yeah, that happened.
And playing a guitar there, it appears, for a Mizzou prospect. So we'll get you pulled back up.
And then Lane Kiffin tweets out back at him. He goes, just when I thought Brian Kelly's couldn't be beat, facepalm. Because who remembers Brian Kelly's cringy dance with the recruit a couple of years ago at LSU?
Okay. Who would you rather have, Lane Kiffin or Eli Drinkwitz?
Lane Kiffin. Guys, it's Lane Kiffin. I'm sorry. It's Lane Kiffin.
Okay, why?
I think I'm a hypocrite on this. Because, like, when Eli Drinkwitz does this stuff, for me, it looks so lame and goofy. And when Lane Kiffin does it, I'm like, it's just Lane being Lane.
Okay, but are you just being superficial? Because let's face it, Lane Kiffin's a better looking guy.
Is he, though? Lane Kiffin has.
Yeah,
he looks like as good as he looked about 10 years ago.
Eli looks like the guy who's sitting in the corner memorizing the Dewey Decimal System. I mean, Lane's the guy who's out on a Friday night with the, picking up the bachelorette party.
I mean, literally.
Literally.
Okay. It's okay. I'll give you an example. It's kind of like in hip hop when rappers start dissing everybody. I kind of think they're lame. But when 50 Cent does it, it's like, I don't know. 50 just seems like the troll that does that because he's funny. Like 50's hilarious. So I don't take it seriously when 50 does it, but I get annoyed when some other rappers like say crazy stuff, and I'm like, I'm that way with Lane. I'm like, I let Lane I don't know why. I just personally let Lane get away with a lot more crazy shenanigans than where I would otherwise judge coaches if they do it. I'll tell you, I'm totally hypocritical with it. And something just tells me, like, you know what I think it is, Dave, is that I think Lane is self-aware, isn't he? He's kind of self-aware that he's a little bit of a...
Yeah, but I sense some of that out of Eli now.
Oh, I think Eli thinks he's, like, showing off some swag when he does this. And, showing off some cool, like, I'm one of the guys. I'm super cool. And I think that's what he's doing. It kind of like when, like, coaches do a dance in the locker room with their players that's, like, is weird. Like, I think that's kind of like what Eli is doing there. I know that's weird, but I don't know. Lane to me seems very self-aware that he's kind of a bit of a troll on Twitter.
No,
and
I read that.
Yeah, that's why I would take Lane Kiffin.
So, new poll question that is up on our message board now. I ask you this: would you rather have Lane Kiffin with off-field issues? Eli Drinkwitz, he's growing on me. So you didn't really assess the off-field issues. You kind of did, but not really. You talked about the tweeting, but there is also all the other talk that was out there. And I don't want to get into it because I don't know that it's 100% true, but I don't need to tell you the rumor about a car and maybe a girl involved and there was a car wreck and all this stuff. I don't know if any of that stuff's true. I mean, I kind of do. But I
think you know the color of the attire that was in the car.
Yes, I think that you I think you have to give Lane some credit for maturing, but that is a factor. I tell you what the factor should be when it comes to choosing your insurance agent is Don Self, State Farm. Don Self, customer service still matters. For 40 years, they built their business on taking care of their customers. When you make that claim, you want to know that it's paid, and that's State Farm. I know everybody wants to save money in this economy. I get it, but customer service still matters. For 40 years, they're right there in the Collegedale and Chattanooga area. 423-396-2126, 423-396-2126. Go to donself.net, right down below, donself.net. So, Caleb, how would you handle or the Lane Kiffin off-field issues if you're making a hire? Let's say you're Florida, because Florida might very well be choosing between Eli Drinkwitz and Lane Kiffin next year. Okay, so you're Florida. Are you a little concerned about the off-field issues? A lot concerned? Are you like, he's almost a 50-year-old man now? I think he'll be 50 any day because he's just a few months younger than me.
I'm not concerned if I'm Florida about the off-field issues. He hasn't had them since he's been at Tennessee, and that was 16 years ago. And look, let's just call it what it is. Lane Kiffin was too young for the Tennessee job. Is that fair to say? He just wasn't mature enough for the Tennessee job at the time, which was something that at the time I remember a lot of Tennessee fans criticized, like, oh, 30, like there's like, who cares about his age? And normally I would say that 33 is fine, but Lane Kiffin was a young 33 mentally compared to some other 33-year-olds.
a young mental. He's a young mental.
He was 33, but it felt like he was like 20. He was living like a 25-year-old. Is that fair to say?
Yes. And by the way, he just turned 49, so I guess he's a year and a little bit of change younger than me. And it was a culture shock, as Dylan writes, going from Fulmer to Kiffin. But Kiffin screwed up a lot, too. Do you remember when he put pictures of USC players in the entire complex, the Tennessee complex? He put pictures of USC players because this was going to be USC East. It was going to get you. Well, they say South. I thought they said East. But anyway, it would get you to the NFL. And that to me didn't go over well at all.
Oh, I remember. I knew that story. Yeah. And also he refused to do the game maxims because he was trying to sit there and say Tennessee's adherence to tradition was costing them. So he did the opposite. He was like, let's just reject all Tennessee tradition whatsoever.
Okay, then I'm challenging you. Why are you taking Lane then?
That was 33-year-old Lane. This is 49-year-old Lane. So now mentally he's got the mind of a 42-year-old. Okay, so it was just perfectly mature enough to be a head coach. And so, I mean, I think this Lane Kiffin is totally different. We're talking about a Lane Kiffin that got fired from USC since then, got humiliated, thoroughly regrets leaving Tennessee, got rehabilitated by getting hired by Alabama, so got to work under Nick Saban for 3 years, and he really hasn't had any issues since. I mean, what's the last controversy that Lane Kiffin had? The only one I can remember is about 8 years ago, he got caught lying about his age on Twitter, which was hilarious. But that's kind of Lane being Lane.
Yeah, who hasn't done that? Daniel says the AD lost control to let USC lose that pick. In retrospect, God rest his soul, if Mike Hamilton puts a tougher buyout for Lane, if he's on top of him, and do you remember the name David Blackburn, who was
the AD at Chattanooga?
Yeah. Well, if he'd have been put over there to oversee Lane, let's face it, you hired Lane Kiffin expecting to get the maturity level of Philip Fulmer, but a more innovative coach, right? Because that's all you've been around.
Also a coach with more personality to make a splash against other SEC coaches.
Agreed. And that's all you had been around. So you're like, oh, the coaches just handle themselves with that maturity. That's how they get to this level. And I think Mike Hamilton thought that Lane Kiffin would be like that. I think we all learned pretty quickly that he wasn't. It's not a knock. Again, you mentioned his age, and that is a factor, especially coming from, talk about maturity levels. I think people that tend to come from well-to-do families maybe have a sense of arrested development a little bit.
Well, so let's look at Lane Kiffin's backstory. He comes from a well-to-do family of a coach. On top of that, he then went and played. Who did he first coach under, Dave, as an assistant? Hit the assistant lottery working under Pete Carroll just as the USC Dynasty was happening, right?
Yep.
The Pac-12 Dynasty. And so, like, Lane had never really had to deal with any sort of adversity because of that. His first adversity is coaching under the Raiders, where he loses his job in 2 years, but that's not really going to humble you because everybody in the world would be willing to say it was Al Davis's fault at that point. I mean, if you lose your job, if you get fired by Al Davis, you're never going to think it's your fault. I wouldn't think it's my fault if I got fired by Al Davis because he was firing everybody.
Travis says, how is 49-year-old Lane's dating life? Surely he prefers older women now, right? Well, that is the concern. And there have been a lot of rumors and talk about his younger girlfriend. But really, is that something that should be held against him?
That's
Caleb?
business. I don't care about that. I don't care about
Travis
that.
says David Blackburn was one of my high school coaches. He was a great dude. Definitely was. And I will tell you that, oddly enough, it was Philip Fulmer addressing David Blackburn Sr.'s passing that made David Blackburn come to Tennessee and end up almost being their athletic director. I think he is now at MTSU. I would like to see Lane in a job in which he could win a championship, because I don't think he can do so at Ole Miss. And you know why? It's not because I'm rooting for him necessarily. I just want to see if he can do it. I feel like he's kind of Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan won the championships. And I'm older than you, Caleb. So there was a conversation. Who's better, Jordan or Dominique? Sounds stupid now, right? But now we're having that conversation with Eli. There was this conversation too. Jordan can't win a championship. All he can do is score. Okay, well, Kiffin can't win a championship. All he can do is run an offense. So there's part of me that just wants to see him have the opportunity to see if it can happen. Because I don't know which way I'd bet that he'd win a national title or not. If you had to bet a week's salary, what would it be?
I'd bet a week's salary he could in the right spot. It's funny. The phrase was, I've read this literally up until 1991, the most commonly used phrase in basketball was scoring champions or never champions. That's what they would say. And
that is very true.
Yeah, because and you could go back and look, almost always the scoring champion barely had his team in the playoffs. And you're right, it's kind of like it's the phrase offense wins games, defense wins championships in football. And a lot of times that rings true. I mean, even in today's era of football, I mean, Dave, we talk about this. Who are the last 3 national champions? Michigan, Georgia. All 3 were, I mean, they had a bland offense and they won with their discipline on defense, didn't they? And I mean, that's still weirdly isn't changing much. And so I think it's kind of intriguing with, you're right, but that question applies to Lane Kiffin. That question applies to Eli Drinkwitz. It applies to both of them. But in that regard, it applies to Josh Heupel. I mean, can Josh Heupel get over the hump? I've said this before. It applied to Steve Spurrier. We could say what we want. Spurrier backed into one national title that he was really lucky to get in 1996. And otherwise, Florida, I mean, how often, Dave, wasn't Florida notoriously known as soft whenever they went up against Florida State?
Yeah, they were. And let me ask you this, since you mentioned Heupel. Should he be a little goofier? I mean, Brian Kelly was goofy at LSU. You now have Eli being goofy. Lane's goofy all the time. Does Josh Heupel try to act too cool?
No, I don't think it has any impact. I think Brian Kelly is just like, the goofy behavior of him is the one thing that makes me question him as a coach, because I thought he was the first LSU coach with brain cells since Nick Saban. So, I mean,
go ahead.
but you know, is Brian Kelly? Speaking of that, I mean, wasn't Les Miles the goofiest head coach in the SEC ever? But the thing was, Les Miles wasn't even aware that he was goofy, was he?
I think he was both, actually. I think he was goofy just because he was goofy, and I think he enjoyed being goofy. And I say that because I was about to interview him one time in West Virginia, and he screamed at one of the managers. He goes, "Don't you be hitting on my wife." He was just talking to her as a joke, and he scared that guy to death. And the guy thought he was fired on the spot and was going to get left in Huntington, West Virginia, or wherever they play that game.